Hello, dear Thomas, and thank you for responding with such a good heart to this invitation for authors to talk and a conversation about your monumental last book, The Embodied Mind, which has become a bestseller book and has also been translated in Greek for the Greek audience. So thank you for accepting this invitation.
Well,
Well, Thomas, the book was published some years ago. And
yes.
what was the time of the book's conception? When did you initially get the idea of writing this book?
Well, my first big book, I had written some books before, but my first big international bestseller was The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. And that was published in 1981, I think. Seems like a lifetime, lifetime ago. Um,
We
but so,
learned all because of your
yes,
book
thank you, thank you,
everywhere.
thank you. So, but in that book, um, I wrote about the fact that children in utero already, certainly from the 6 months after conception, are able to lay down memories, that they are really reacting to their environment and taking some of it in. The fact that they can't remember it after they are born or at the age of 3 or 10 or 15 doesn't really matter. The fact is that it is inscribed in their memories wherever they are stored, and that it will have a certain effect on their personality as they develop. So that was at that time a very revolutionary thought. Most people, if not almost everybody, believed that children before the age of 2 were not able to remember anything, which of course had terrible, terrible consequences, this kind of a belief, because then doctors, for example, could go around and operate on newborn children or even young children without an anesthetic because they thought that they would never remember the pain, which of course is horrible, just plain horrible. Um, but few years later, actually, it was proven that children before the age of 2, even at birth, even before birth, shortly before birth, during the last trimester, are able to remember what happens to them. And many of those children either died during those operations because of the pain, and those that did not die were like traumatized for life. So, but my sort of my problem in terms of understanding what is going on with memory, my problem was that I could show scientifically there was very, very, very good evidence. And since that time, more and more evidence has accumulated that children, certainly from the age of 6 months after conception, at the end of the second trimester, um, their cognitive system, their neurology, their cerebral neurons, everything is developed to the point that they can lay down memories according to sort of orthodox, accepted neurological science. But over the years, especially after the publication of The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, over the years, I heard more and more reports of people remembering things that happened to them before the second or even the first trimester. Some people seem to recall, and that those memories then were supported by facts. Um, they seem to recall even their conception. And then there were people who seemed to have certain phobias, certain fears, for which there was no accounting. And in some cases, it could be proven that some of those fears, phobias, anxieties, uh, started with their parents or even grandparents, that they could go back several generations. And these people did not know anything about it, like fear of drowning, for example. Someone great fear of open waters. And then it turns out that their grandfather was drowned. So these things I wondered about. How could it be? How could it be? And then um, about, I guess now it's about 10 years ago. Um, about 10 years ago, I came across a, um, a paper in a medical journal that described a 44-year-old French man who went to his doctor because he had a weakness in his left leg. And so the doctor did all kinds of neurological tests, and they also did a scan of his skull. And to everybody's amazement, it turned out that this man had virtually no brain. His whole skull was filled with water. We called it hydrocephalus. And there was only a thin crescent of brain tissue. Yet this man was gainfully employed as a civil servant. He was married. He had two children. For all intents and purposes, he was perfectly normal, except that little left leg difficulty. So when I read that, I thought to myself, how is this possible? How can a person be so well adjusted, behave so naturally, and have virtually no brain? And, looking at our civilization, looking at our history, uh, the head has always been overvalued. And so, even before your wonderful Greek civilization, even before that, the head of the family was the person in charge, right? The head of the tribe. Who is the head of government? How do we get ahead? It's all head, head, head. And so this also helped to produce a kind of patriarchal system in our society. And that has been going on for as long as we can, have history. As long as history goes back thousands of years, there's always been pretty well a man at the head of the family and at the head of everything. So we have a hierarchy. So these men set up a hierarchical system that sort of served them well, did not serve women well. And what has also happened is that the same kind of a hierarchical system has been unconsciously adopted by science and medicine. So even in the 20th century, when sort of the term psychosomatic medicine became popularized, even when you just look at that term for a moment, psychosomatic. In other words, the psyche, the brain, soma, up here, down there. And then many of sort of the bad things that we develop in our bodies, like ulcers, for example, or heart attacks, they are all sort of blamed on the brain. Okay, you get anxious, you send signals down to your stomach, it produces more acid, you get a duodenal ulcer. Okay, so your brain gets all the all the all the blame. The brain gets blamed. So when I looked at all this kind of, I thought to myself, well, what else is there? What kind of research is there to support the idea that there must be other ways of remembering things, not just by neurons in the brain? And so then I started looking into this, and that took me like 6, 7 years of research. Uh, and I found that there is a great deal of evidence that what we have is an interconnected system, okay? It's from the body to the brain, from the brain to the body. The brain is not detached from the body the way so many people pretend it to be, okay? There is a constant signaling going on between the brain and the body and the brain and the body. And so one of the problems that I'm trying to perhaps correct with my book and talking to you and to others is this wrong emphasis on the brain. It's not that the brain is unimportant, it's just that the body is equally important, okay? And that we need to have a more holistic view of how the mind works and how the body works and how they interact with each other. So, just to give you an example, um, for example, let's take Alzheimer's disease, which is now, on everybody's mind. The moment I forget a word, I think, oh my God, yeah, here we go. This is the beginning of the end, right? Uh, so, Alzheimer's disease, you have these plaques, amyloid plaques in the brain. So, all the doctors, well, not all, 90% of the doctors, neurologists, neuroscientists, and of course the pharmacological companies, they're all looking at how to prevent amyloid um, plaques to be formed in the brain. Research from Australia, from one of the Australian universities, for example, um, has shown that actually amyloid is also produced in the liver. In the liver. And from the liver, it goes to the brain. So, if he could stop amyloid being produced in the liver, I don't know whether it would solve all of the problems with Alzheimer's disease, but it would certainly help. But nobody's looking at that.
Mm.
Nobody's looking at that because everybody is just focused on the brain. It's the same thing with plaques, atherosclerotic plaques, okay? Everybody is focused on the fact that the brain is sending down signals which then make the plaques more and more, uh, grow more and more until they eventually occlude the arteries leading to the brain and you get a heart attack and or you die. But actually, what you have is it starts as an inflammation of the arteries leading to the brain. And when that inflammation starts, then neural tissue from around the arteries sends signals to the brain saying, we have an inflammation here, let's do something. That's when the brain sends out stress signals. And then that actually contributes to growing more and more plaques because the brain is trying to stop the inflammation, but in its attempt to stop the inflammation, it builds up more and more plaques. So, you know, we just are not paying enough attention to what's called interoception, the perception of signals from the body to the brain. Okay, what's happening? So, for example, when we get anxious, we think it's our mind, but actually it's the heart that starts pumping blood more quickly. The heart rate increases, blood pressure increases. You produce more glucose because of insulin that's being put into your system. And it's in reaction to the heart increasing its rate that the brain recognizes the fact that you are anxious. It's not the other way around. So, all of this is to say that um, the idea of the body being equally as important in terms of memory, because every cell in your body has the capacity to lay down memories. And it is the complexity of the system working together, not each individual cell, but as a unit, that is kind of a backup to the brain.
Mm.
And so you need both. You need your body and your brain. And sometimes when the brain doesn't function, when you have half of the brain, for example, removed, doctors will tell you, oh, it's brain plasticity. The other part of the brain will take over. That is so much. I can't use the term that I want to use.
Bullshit.
It's just hogwash. It's just hogwash. Also, by the way, I absolutely detest the word brain plasticity. Okay? You know what plastics are. You know what plastics are. Where do I have some plastic here? You know, plastics. Give me a plastic. Okay, here's a plastic. This is plastic. Okay, this is plastic. If this easily breaks, neurons in the brain don't break. This does not grow. Once it's done, it's done. To talk about brain plasticity is idiotic. What neurons and all cells in the body can do, they are incredibly resilient and they change. They change in response to the environment. When there is environmental stimulation, when there are demands by the environment, these cells are so intelligent, it's the only way really to describe them is that they change according to what is given. They are not plastic. It's not brain plasticity. I wish we could remove that term, but it has been accepted and everybody repeats it like a mantra,
Mm.
without thinking about what they are saying.
Well, you touch here a very sensitive theme, Thomas, about what is going on among scientists and researchers when someone starts a thread,
Yes,
whatever, and then everybody supports and follows like sheep
like sheep.
without reflecting what are we talking about.
Right.
Does it make sense asking beautiful, new, interesting questions which will lead to beautiful answers? Very important what you are just saying. And in Greek, we also say that the answer is in the word, the content is in the word. So when you study to the depths of the depths one concept, then you can understand so much, and then you avoid some of these pitfalls that
Right.
you are mentioning when adopting terms like plasticity in your example, doulas in another example,
Yes.
etc., etc.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And I don't know. I don't know what it is in academia. Perhaps you have more experience than I have. But nobody sort of wants to go against their colleagues once you are at the university, right? So
Yes.
you don't want to be, one of your colleagues comes out with brain plasticity, and there's nobody there who will challenge that term because they don't want to be unpopular. They don't want to get into the bad books of that person. So everybody, kisses the ring and
Yeah.
everybody agrees. And every time I pick up the newspaper or scientific papers, they all talk about brain plasticity. And it drives me crazy.
Mm.
Uh, and by the way, it's this, we have been talking about the brain and how people can survive. And in my book, I give many, many examples from the literature of children and adults having a great part of their brain removed and still functioning beautifully. And to say that, the small part of the brain that remains has taken over the functions of what has been removed is just ridiculous. And there's no evidence for it. There's no evidence. It's just theoretical. Well, I guess this is the only answer, so this is our answer. But I just last week, um, there was a big newspaper article about a young baby that was born, and it had constant epileptic attacks. there is a disease that gives you, like, every couple of minutes you can have an epileptic attack. So what this doctor, I think in Toronto, did was that he removed a large part of the area in the brain of this child that seemed to be giving him or her, I forgot who it was, um, giving her epileptic fits. And then he's quoted as saying that this is a new procedure, and there are very few people in the world who are doing it. And it's not a new procedure. And it has been done in all kinds of countries. And this guy is like the head of the department and greatly praised as a leading scientist. And he doesn't even know the history of these operations. It's frightening.
It is. It is. So let's uh, go back to this
Yeah.
title, The Embodied Mind.
Yes.
And how would you connect it with fractals, where the part cell in our example is or carries the everything of the whole?
Um, I'm not familiar. You said fractals, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with fractals. I never mentioned that word in my book. I'm not familiar with it. Um, what I do talk about is quantum mechanics,
Hmm.
which I think comes closer to that, and the fact that the mind, might be very much both. In some ways, the mind is a product of the brain, but does not uh, fully um, rely on the brain. So
Hmm.
yes, the brain is sort of like this television set. Okay,
Hmm.
we are looking at each other and we are speaking. Uh, my speech is not produced by the television set. It's produced by me. The
Yeah.
television set only transmits it to you and vice versa. So that's how I see the brain, that it's necessary there for you and I to recognize each other and to talk to each other, but it does not produce my speech or your speech. That's coming from somewhere else. So
Yeah.
it is dependent on the television set, it is dependent on the brain, it is dependent on the body, and perhaps more. Okay, so that's where sort of the spiritual element comes in. That, there are quite a number of very, very brilliant scientists who say that consciousness preceded matter, actually, in terms of the constitution of the universe, that consciousness came first, and
Mm.
out of consciousness came energy and matter.
Mm.
Um, so this is strange territory for me. All I can say is that some brilliant scientists have spoken about this, and I can see their point, although I do not fully understand it. But it certainly makes sense to me that consciousness and the mind, I mean, the two are connected. The consciousness and the mind uh, are somehow bigger than the brain. Like, it cannot just be a function of the brain. Like, again, scientists talk about consciousness and the mind as being functions of the brain, just like, urine is a function of the kidneys. And it's ridiculous. Again, that doesn't make sense. Urine, you can put into a container, you can look at it, you can analyze it chemically. Try to do that with the mind. You can't. It's immaterial. And so to say that the material of the brain produces something immaterial, there's a disconnect there.
Yeah. So it makes me think of this saying that think and you have it.
Think and you have what?
And you have it. Whatever you think, you can have it because,
Oh,
as you said, uh, first it's the consciousness,
yes, right.
and whatever conception your book, for
Yeah,
example, some years ago you conceived the
yes,
idea of
right,
this, and
right,
then you had the material thing,
right, right.
actually the book
Yeah.
or the matter.
Yes, that's right. Yes. And so that's where we get into quantum mechanics, quantum physics, okay, where we know that the presence of the observer, the experimenter, influences the experiment.
Hmm.
I mean, this has been a huge discovery. That this is huge because what it shows is that mind can influence matter. And so if you take Einstein's famous E is equal mc square, right, which is sort of the basis of everything nowadays in terms of classical Newtonian physics, E is equal mc square also means that mc square is equal E. It's the
Yes.
same equation. So out of energy, which in some ways is consciousness, we can have an influence on matter, mc square, right? So that's where, for example, hypnosis comes in, or a placebo effect. Okay. If you believe that this is not going to hurt, that you can operate on my tooth, let's say, you can fill my tooth without a local anesthetic, as long as you hypnotize me and you tell me that it's not gonna hurt, and you are very good at hypnosis and you find a very good subject. I mean, both of those are necessary. Not everybody can be hypnotized, but if you have a good hypnotist and if you have a good subject, I've had I've had people who have been hypnotized and they have undergone major surgery without anesthetic. And
Mm.
then of course you have all these people who are walking on hot coals. You have seen that, right?
Yes.
And they don't get burnt. That's mind over matter, right? If you believe it, then it will have a terrific effect. It doesn't work in all cases, right? I mean, there are many, many factors that play into it, but it does work with some people, and that proves that it can work. Okay. All you need is one black swan to prove the fact that not all swans are white.
Which is also a huge key
Yes,
for transformation,
yes,
changing our minds or uh, tuning our minds in a specific direction or signal
yes.
may transform our experience of the world.
Yes, 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 yes. So, if you take the book sort of um, out of the theoretical and into the practical, then that's where it sort of the rubber hits the ground, because realizing that mind can have such powers gives us the tools, so to speak, to live a much more healthy life,
Mm.
both in terms of our relationships with people, but also in our relationship with our bodies. So, one of the things that so many people don't do because they are busy, right? Including myself, that we don't really listen to our bodies a lot of the time. Our bodies are trying to tell us things,
Mm.
but we don't listen. Okay. I get a pain in my hip or something like that, and instead of standing up and doing some exercises, I say, oh, I just want to finish this paper, I just need
Yes,
another half hour, right? You know the feeling.
I do. Yeah.
So, we are all guilty of this, and we are not listening enough to our bodies. Our bodies are trying to save us, and we don't listen.
Yes. Which is a call for revisiting the existing culture
Yes.
uh, in both the Western world and perhaps beyond the Western
Yes,
world.
yes, definitely, definitely. Yes,
Previously, you spoke of this, you gave an example about a person who has this uh, inexplicable fear of drowning.
yes,
And
yes,
much, I'm bringing this to our discussion. And on the other hand, we also have a growing body of knowledge towards epigenetics and genetics. In a way, we could say that we, each one of us, is the outcome of some kind of epigenetic or many generations epigenetic
yes.
changes. Would you like to explain this old understanding of genetics and now the more and more well-known epigenetics?
Sure. Yeah. Uh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a long time, genetics was seen as kind of a life sentence.
Mm,
Like, these are your genes. This is who you are. There's nothing you can do about changing it. Okay? Genes are your destiny. That's it. Finished. End of story. Um, I don't know how many years ago, I think about 30 years ago, give or take, um, first scientists started to talk about the fact that, which was obvious for 1,000 years, but scientists didn't seem to clue into it, uh, that people change as a result of their environment. And I'm trying to think um, who it was. There was a Russian scientist actually in the 1920s who came out with this idea, but he was very quickly, criticized and put down. And for the life of me now, I can't remember his name. Do
mm,
you remember? Oh, well, anyway, there was a Russian scientist. It wasn't Pavlov, it was somebody else who came up with the idea that our genes are not our destiny and that there are some changes that might be happening as a result of the environment. And
mhm,
he was, very quickly criticized and finished. But about 30 years ago, geneticists slowly started to see that there is there is some kind of a change that goes on, which of course makes total sense. I mean, let's say a child is born into into an area of the world where there's very little food, okay, where people are going hungry all the time. Well, that will have an effect on his genetics. People didn't know just exactly how. And then finally, also what people knew, what geneticists knew for a long time was that along the along a what is it called DNA strand, there were a lot of non uh, there were no genes. It just seemed to be what they referred to as
rubbish.
um,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, that word, yeah, something
yeah,
like that, like rubbish, um, what's the word? Sorry. Uh, yeah, just useless stuff, right?
useless
Useless
stuff.
stuff,
Yes.
useless stuff. Then people discovered that they were full of methyl and ethyl groups. And then they discovered that these methyl and ethyl groups actually worked as switches.
Mm,
So, and the switches react to the environment. So, uh, if there is, for example, hunger around, then the switch that controls many of the genes that control your hunger drives or your food ingestion drives, although anything that has to do with nutrition, they will be turned on, turned off in such a way that you have a better chance at surviving starvation than if those genes were fully functional. So what they discovered, to make a long story short, was that they discovered these epigenes, epi meaning on top of. So on top of those genes, there were the little switches, which are consisting of ethyl and methyl groups, biologically speaking. And the methyl groups turn switches off, and the ethyl groups turn switches on. And these switches are activated by the environment. So that is wonderful because that way, you and I, we get the option of actually, well, many times, not always, but many times we have the option of select the kind of environment that is going to do us most good. And when that happens, those good switches will turn on, the bad switches will turn off, and we will be happy and healthy. Now, just to give you an example, which I just absolutely love, if I can remember it, um, there was a professor in the United States. I think it's, oh my goodness, um, I think it's Iowa University. I forgot. I can look it up. But anyway, at one university, and what he did was he took newly born bees from two different bee populations. One were the African, which were called killer bees, African killer bees, which were very violent, very aggressive. And then there was another beehive, which was European bees, which were much more pacific, much less violent, much more peaceful. And he took 300 newborn bees from one side and put them into the other side, and from the other side into this side. So he took these violent, aggressive African killer bees, put them into the European bees, and 2 weeks later, he examined their genes. And he found that the ones that were with the quieter bees changed their genes expression in such a way that they were much more peaceful than originally, and vice versa. The quiet European bees became much more violent, which shows beautifully how you react to your environment. What it also shows, and I wish I could remember his name, but I haven't looked it up for a while. Um, what it also shows is, I think, is what so frequently happens to mobs of people. Okay. So when you have a mob of people and some of them start getting violent, the other ones pick up on it, and more people pick up on it, and more people pick on it. And so you have things like the lynching mobs in the United States, let's say 100, 150 years ago, where it happened all the time. Speaking of the United States, you have the Washington storming of of the Congress uh, several years ago, September 7, I think it was. You have the pogroms in Europe, right? All of when you get a mob together and there is agitation, most of them are not agitated, but when a few of them start agitating, it becomes infectious, and other people around them get affected on a genetic level, not just psychologically. So it works on both in both ways, biologically, psychologically, and of course the two are inseparable. It's the same thing, right?
Yes.
So it does explain a lot in terms of people. Let's say how children are brought up in certain households and how their gene expression changes. Let's say that you have the misfortune of being brought up in a violent household. The tendency to become violent is going to be, supported in you. Even if you were not born with it, but you do have the genes with it because you have your mother's and father's genes. But if you had been, let's say, taken away from those violent parents and put into a more peaceful environment, you may have never become violent.
which brings a lot of responsibility in a good
Yes,
meaning to
yes,
parents,
yes,
grandparents, and the
yes,
living generations.
yes, 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 exactly.
They seem to hold the destiny of their children, grandchildren, and perhaps the humanity 100 generations from now in their hands, in our hands now.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Yeah, uh, you speak about this cellular intelligence, and
Yes,
intelligence is something that is different from just being clever. There's
yes.
is a level, a higher level of knowing what you are doing. So this cellular intelligence, could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, we don't usually think of cells as being intelligent, but when you look at their behavior, excuse me, when you look at their behavior, they are really amazingly intelligent. If by intelligent you mean the capacity to adjust in a positive way to your environment, try to survive. Um, not only that, but cells can be very compassionate, if I can use that term. For example, it has been observed that if there is a cell that is suffering of some kind of a disease, whatever it might be, let's say a bacterial invasion, something like that, other cells around it will start sending will start sending substances into that cell in order to try to cure it. And I actually have pictures of that where you can actually see tiny little connections, canals, if you like, between one cell and another, and they are sending um, proteins and other stuff into the other cell in an attempt to try to heal it. Um, and of course, speaking of healing, we have our immune system, which is there to heal our bodies. Very, very clever. The moment that there is, excuse me, any kind of an invasion or harm to the body, the immune cells start coming together and try to repair the damage, which is amazing. Um, Interestingly enough, speaking of that, just last week, there was a new research that showed that T cells, which are very important parts of the immune system, T cells are also found in the healthy brain, and they are not there to to cure anything or to heal anything. They're just there, and what the researchers proposed um, and perhaps it's more than just proposed, strongly suggested, is that the T cells are bringing information from the gut to the brain, keeping the brain informed in terms of what's happening to the gut and the rest of the body, which again would be another communication system between the body and the brain. And there it is. Uh, so cells play an incredibly important role. Another scientist has said that we are intelligent machines made up of intelligent tissues made up of intelligent cells all the way down. Okay, and so to think of cells as just being like these, I don't know, bricks, in the wall of a house, like, just kind of non-living in a sense, not contributing in any way to the intelligence and the survival of the body and the mind is just wrong. It does not it does not compute. It does not really meet scientific standards as we have them, as we know them. And the other important thing, if I may, speaking of cells, is that um, Michael Levine, who I think is one of the finest scientists living in the United States at Tufts University, uh, he has said, there is very little difference between neurons and other cells in the bodies. They're just more specialized, but they're still cells and they act like all other cells, which, if you take it the other way, also means that cells are like neurons. Neurons are like cells, and cells are like neurons, which means that they can contain a lot of information.
Hmm. It would be nice if we could mirror it, this
Yes.
intelligence, to societies and other human-made systems and organizations.
Well, system, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that word. Yeah, I mean, certainly computers have taught us that systems is really everything, right? Like we are connected through God knows how complicated systems, right? And so it's the same thing in the body. It's just one interconnected, intercommunicating system. And the same thing applies to our relationship to our environment. That's also the ecosystem, right? Uh, and if we destroy certain animals in our environment, for example, which we are doing all the time, and if we are destroying like growing trees and shrubs and flowers, it's going to affect us ultimately because we are connected to
Yes.
that system. It's all one system. And we are doing the best we can, not you and I, but as a civilization, to make life uninhabitable on this planet sooner or later.
Yeah, we are treading on very treacherous
Yes.
borderline at the
Very,
moment.
very, very,
Yeah.
very, yeah,
And reading your book, Thomas, one can see how important it is to not to just focus on one, but one discipline, for example, or one, let's say,
right,
system or body of
right,
knowledge, but
right.
how important it is to be inclusive, transdisciplinary, and
Yes,
see the same thing from different perspectives because the story is the same.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And this is something that you have been working on now for many years, trying to establish like the connection between various organizations,
Yeah.
working in the pre and perinatal psychology field, and trying to bring everybody together, kind of a United Nations of pre and
Yeah.
perinatal psychology.
Hopefully, we can do it with a good success rate. But
If anybody can do it, you can do it. Yeah.
uh,
And
how,
also, you spoke very nicely of my book. I think your book, Mother, is fabulous. I just want to say that it's just one of the best books I have ever read. It is so deep, and it branches out into so many different areas. Uh, if you ever just want to read one book, read Olga's book. That's my advice.
oh, that is melody to my heart. Thank you.
You're
And,
welcome. I mean it. I mean it. Yeah.
and since I used the word heart, and you speak in the book about
Yes.
heart
Yes.
transplants, and there is something very special here. Would you
Yes.
like to just say a few words
Sure.
about heart transplants and personality changes?
Yeah, I think that changes that have been reported worldwide that occur after heart transplants, changes in terms of the donors, some aspects of the donor's personality seem to be um, seem to come out of the blue in many cases, in the person who the recipient of the heart transplant. So, for example, a heart recipient, the recipient of a heart transplant who has never ever liked meat, let's say was a vegetarian all her life, suddenly has a huge craving for meat. And then they find out, they did not know this, but they find out after several months or years, whatever it is, we can look into the actual reports, that the person that they received the heart transplant from was a young man who loved meat. So, how does that occur? I think that if we can trust these case reports, and I see no reason why we shouldn't, um, then that is probably one of the best uh, evidences for the fact that cells and tissues contain memories, because how otherwise would that person have changed in such a drastic way unless they have received a whole new influx of thinking and feeling, right? So I think that heart transplants are incredibly important to look at, because they really prove uh, the hypothesis that I'm putting forward in the embodied mind, that cells and tissues do contain memories. And of course, the more cells and the more tissues, the more memories they will contain. Um, so I think that this is really an area that needs further research. Unfortunately, I don't know whether it's going to happen, because once again, we are meeting resistance by established um, surgeons, cardiac surgeons, etc. The few that I spoke to, and I said, do you ever ask your recipients of heart transplants, whether they have had any changes in personality? They just looked at me. Oh, why would I? Like, why would I? No, no, I don't. I don't. And if the patient ever, let's say, tells them that there have been some changes, they will attribute it to the changes in medication, to the
Mm.
surgery that they underwent, uh, stuff like that. And it never occurs to them that it could be anything else. Their minds are closed, and it's very, very difficult to change that. Um, I think that I was incredibly lucky with The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, um, be, that it really changed. Um, I think I'm not being immodest when I say that, it changed the landscape of the way people looked at unborn children or newborn children as a result of my book. And the reason that I say I was lucky is that at the time when my book got published, Simon and Schuster, who was the publisher, very, very large and well recognized publisher in the United States, at that time they had money. Nowadays they all the publishers say we have no money. So at that time they had money, and they did publicity for me, which is where you and I started our discussion today. And so, they took me around around the United States from east to west, west to east. I was on television shows, I was on radio shows, I was interviewed, and that created a demand and gradually an acceptance of the book. Without that, it could have been the best book in the world and could have been, perhaps sold 5,000 copies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now it has been published in 36 countries, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. And nobody criticizes it, which is at that now it has become like mainstream. This
Yeah.
is
It is
this,
the
this is not
Bible.
yeah, this is not news, okay?
Yeah.
Uh, at the time that I published it, I was attacked left and right, being unscientific, and just being based on uh, what do they call them? Stories. Of course, it wasn't stories. There was a lot of science in it, as much science as was available at that time. You're talking 1979, 1980. There wasn't that much science, but whatever science there was, I put it in there. So what I'm saying is it's very difficult to change uh, the minds of academics who essentially sort of set the standards for how medicine is practiced. And so, unless it's accepted by academia, it's very difficult to change the world. And so, like, one more example. I mean, this is what happened, let's say, with anesthesia of newborn children. It was not until the head of anesthetics at the Massachusetts General Hospital wrote an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the Bible of medical sciences. It's the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet, which are sort of the two most important journals. Uh, he published a fantastic art paper showing that children, even before they are born, are perceiving pain, and that they are that in some ways they are feeling pain even more than adults, and that they must be given anesthetics and analgesics if they're being operated on. And that changed everything because it was the head, once again, the head of the Department of Anesthesiology at the Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard University. And so it was gradually accepted. But if it comes from me, who is not the head of anything, then of course there is less acceptance.
Which brings our discussion to the theme of the courage that needs to be part
Yes,
of the individual who has seen the truth or some part of
yes,
the truth before everybody else, to
right.
stay centered and tell the truth, the full strength to all directions, and being part of the academia is not just a title, it's a
No,
huge
responsibility.
responsibility for the
Yes,
humanity.
yes, that's right.
Well, Thomas, let's finish this beautiful conversation, given some practical applications of the hypothesis of the embodied mind. By the way, there is a beautiful format of the book because every chapter uh,
Finishes.
finishes with a summary and
Yes,
takeaways, and
yes.
this makes reading so much more meaningful because you get the main points, the main messages. So let's do this conversation and have some takeaways, some practical takeaways for
Okay,
the people.
okay. So, um, number one, um, the mind is very powerful. So use it to heal yourself if there is any healing necessary, and use your mind to stay in touch with your body, which is the second most important thing. Listen to your body. Uh, don't trivialize messages that you get from your body. I think that's very, very important. And also, in case that you are not well or you're sick, um, it is very helpful to consider healing your body with your mind. Okay, think whatever you need to think to, well, let's say that you develop a duodenal ulcer. It would be very important to think, to try to visualize the ulcer, and then trying to have sort of a visual imagery of how it would heal. And if you can do that day after day after day, the chances of that ulcer healing are greatly improved. So I'm not saying that it's a 100% guarantee, but it will certainly help, and it may even cure it all by itself without the use of medications. So I think that's important. One of the things we have not talked about is the importance of the your gut bacteria. And to every research shows that a diversified diet will bring about diversified bacteria, and diversified bacteria produce all kinds of good messages to the brain that will keep you healthy. A lot of people who are depressed because they have the wrong bacteria in their gastrointestinal tract. So taking care of your diet is very important because of the bacteria in your gut, which then send good or bad messages depending to your brain. So those three things I can think of right away. Um, what else? Um, that's all that comes to my mind at the moment. I'm sure there are more, but can you think
Um,
of anything else?
Well, we can open your book and I
Yes.
will Bible, and
Yeah.
I'm sure that you will find a lot. So
Yes.
let's leave this to the readers who will be curious enough and spend some time uh, studying every day, whatever is the result of years of research, because it may have taken you 6, 10 years to write this, but that was all only the last part of the story.
Mhm.
It
That's
is
right.
based on, let's say, 60 years
Yes.
of deep
That's right.
work.
Yeah. That's right. That's
Yeah,
right. It's really a lifetime of work. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And of course, the other thing is that it is available, of course, in Greek, in Greek,
yes.
in Greek, yes.
In
And it's,
Greek,
yeah, in Greek, it's available in Portuguese, in Brazil, in Spanish, in Russian, and in Czech also. So quite a few languages. The
one.
one that not available yet is Italian and French. So if anybody is listening who would like to uh, bring it out in French or Italian, please contact me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas. Continue creating, continue being healthy and creative. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga, and the same, very same to you. Take care. Nice talking to you.